I woke to the sound of my name being whispered, soft and close, like it came from right next door. My ear. My eyes flew open and there it was. A face inches from mine, pale and stretched. Unnaturally long, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I couldn't move. My breath caught in my chest as the thing's mouth widened into a grin that was too big, too sharp. Then, before I could scream, it darted backward into the shadows, leaving the room unnervingly silent. I bolted upright, heart pounding, but the air felt wrong, thick and cold. The window was wide open, though I swore I'd locked it before bed. My legs trembled as I slid off the bed and stepped toward the door, desperate to turn on the light. Just as my fingers touched the switch, the whisper came again from behind me. This time, it wasn't my name. It was laughing. The forest pressed in on me from all sides, suffocating in its silence. My breath came shallow and fast as I pushed through a tangle of branches. Then I saw it, a narrow, dirt trail cutting through the trees, smooth and straight like it had been placed there just for me. I froze, dread crawling up my spine. Desperation made the decision for me. It had to lead somewhere, maybe a road, a house, anything but this endless maze of trees. The unnatural stillness. The deeper I walked, the more the forest seemed to shift around me. The trees leaned closer, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out even the faintest light. The air grew colder, and the faint scent of rot began to creep in. I kept moving, even as the strange carvings started appearing on the trees. At first they were simple shapes, circles and spirals etched crudely into the bark, but then I saw hands, their fingers clawing at the wood. Eyes followed, countless eyes, staring back at me. My heart raced. I swore the carvings weren't there when I'd first passed. Then the whispers began. Soft, indistinct murmurs drifted from the shadows, just out of reach. I stopped, straining to hear. Hello? My voice sounded small and foreign in the suffocating silence. I turned, breaking into a run, no longer caring where the path led. When I burst into a clearing, I froze in horror. My own footprints stretched ahead of me, circling back to where I'd started. The path had betrayed me. The forest was playing games. The air grew colder as the light faded unnaturally fast, swallowing the forest in darkness. My steps faltered, my breath clouding in front of me. The whispers were louder now, weaving between the trees, calling my name in a tone that chilled me to my core. It wasn't possible. No one else could be out here. I turned sharply as a shadow darted between the trees, fast and impossibly tall. My heart hammered. It was too big to be an animal, and its movements were deliberate, purposeful. I quickened my pace, the path blurring beneath my feet as I tried to outrun whatever was following me. The sound of crashing brush came from somewhere ahead, a low, guttural noise, like branches, snapping under heavy weight. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. The forest seemed alive, shifting around me, the trees leaning in as if to block my escape. Then, I stumbled. My foot caught on something and I hit the ground hard. Pain shot up my arm, but I ignored it. Scrambling to push myself up, my hands brushed against something cold and rough, a bundle of sticks tied together with strands of dark, matted hair. The smell hit me then, something acrid, still, like burned flesh and rotting leaves. I stared at the bundle, my pulse pounding in my ears. Next to it lay a tattered notebook. My shaking hands picked it up, and I flipped through its yellowed pages. Frantic handwriting filled. Every line, words overlapping in a chaotic scrawl. It knows your fear. It feeds on it. Don't stop moving. The last entry sent ice through my veins. The forest won't let me leave. If you're reading this, it's already too late. A crackling noise snapped me out of my paralysis. Something was breathing, low and heavy, right behind me. I didn't wait to find out what was breathing behind me. I shoved the notebook into my jacket and bolted into the undergrowth, leaving the trail behind. The brambles tore at my arms and legs, ripping my clothes. But I didn't care. I couldn't stay there, not with whatever was watching me. The forest grew thicker, the air heavier. Each step felt like trudging through molasses, muscles screaming as I pushed forward. Finally, I broke through the dense trees into an open area. My heart leapt. This place was different. I wasn't on the path anymore. Then I saw it, a faint orange glow flickering through the trees ahead. A campfire. Relief surged through me, and I sprinted toward it, shouting hoarsely, "Hello? Is someone there?" The fire dimmed as I approached, shrinking to little more than smoldering embers. Turned to unease as I stepped into the clearing. Shapes were strange, crooked and uneven, as if crafted by hands that didn't understand how chairs should look. On one of them was a jacket, my jacket, the one I'd lost weeks ago on a hike, miles away from. I reached for it hesitantly, my fingers trembling as they brushed the fabric. It was damp and cold, like it had been lying in the forest for years. How could it be here? Then I noticed the trees around me, their twisted branches and the carvings on their trunks. They weren't new. I'd seen them before. Panic gripped me as I turned in a slow circle. The dirt trail stretched out before me, unchanged. Somehow, impossibly, I had returned to the exact same spot. Behind me, the whispers started again, closer now, and laughing. The laughter behind me stopped abruptly, replaced by an unnatural silence that pressed against my ears. I stumbled back onto the trail, gasping for air. That's when I noticed it. The trees around me were different. The carvings now spelled out words. My name was there, etched into. Instead of being treated like a luxurious rug, it lay scorched in a hospital kitchen. Almost every trunk, dripping, with a thick, dark sap that smelled like iron. I backed away, but the trail was shifting underfoot, twisting like a living thing. The whispers began again, louder this time, and unmistakably familiar. My stomach churned as I recognized the voices, my mother's soft call, my best friend's laugh, even my own voice, crying for help. "Come here," a voice pleaded from deeper within the forest. One I hadn't heard in years. It was Mast, the voice of someone I'd lost. My chest tightened as I saw a figure step out from behind the trees. It was them. Their face was blurred, but I knew it was them. They held out a hand, beckoning, promising safety with an expression that radiated calm, tears spilling down my cheeks. Then they shifted, their form flickering like static. Before I could scream, the figure melted into a grotesque wooden effigy, its face twisted into a scream, its limbs bound with the same matted hair I'd seen earlier. More effigies hung from the trees around it, swaying unnaturally despite the still air. I fell to my knees, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. Flipping through its pages, I found something new. Words had appeared in jagged, rushed handwriting. "It knows what scares you. It feeds on your fear. Don't let it win." But how could I fight something that already knew me so intimately? The forest wasn't just watching. It was inside my head. The whispers didn't guide me, they pushed me. The forest seemed alive, herding me toward something, and I had no strength to resist anymore. My legs ached, my breath burned. But when I looked ahead, I saw it. A massive, ancient tree towering above the canopy. Its gnarled branches clawed at the sky, and its trunk pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Something deep inside me screamed to stay away, but I knew I had no choice. This tree was important. It was the heart of the forest. Maybe, just maybe, it held the key to escape, or at least the answer to this nightmare. The closer I got, the more the world around me distorted. The sky above flickered, shifting between day and night in rapid flashes that made my head spin. The trail beneath my feet twisted and stretched, as if trying to trick me into walking in circles. The whispers were no longer faint. At the base of the tree, I stopped, trembling. A hollow gaped in its trunk, black and bottomless. Inside, I saw objects scattered in the dirt. A wedding ring, a child's drawing, a compass, a cracked wristwatch. They weren't random. They were pieces of lives. People who had been here before me. People who had failed. My stomach churned as I picked up the drawing. A child's messy scrawl of a smiling family, their faces now blurred and faded. A faint voice whispered in my ear, "Don't forget me." The realization hit me like a cold wave. The forest didn't just trap bodies. It consumed memories, hopes, everything that made you human. And then, from the hollow, a sound, a deep, resonating thrum, like a heartbeat. Something was waking up. The hollow pulsed with light, growing brighter with each beat, the deep thrum shaking the ground beneath my feet. The objects inside rattled, almost alive, as if they were resisting my presence. Mind in a chaotic torrent. These were lives the forest had devoured, fragments of people who had come before me. Then I saw it. Among the discarded items, half buried in the dirt, was a broken axe head. Rusted and dull, but solid enough. My trembling fingers wrapped around it, the rough metal cold against my skin. If the tree was the heart of this place, then maybe, just maybe, I could stop it. I swung the axe head against the roots, the dull edge biting into the bark. A scream tore through the air, not mine, but something far worse. It was a cry of rage, pain, and desperation, as if the forest itself was alive and reacting to my attack. The ground quaked, and from the shadows they came, twisted, humanoid shapes, their bodies made of wood and shadow, their faces featureless, except for the faint glow of hollow eyes. They moved unnaturally, limbs jerking as they closed in on me. I swung again, and again, each strike releasing a burst of sap that stank of rot and decay. The creatures surrounded me, their hands clawing, their whispers now a deafening roar. One grabbed my arm, pulling me back. Desperate, I hurled the notebook into the hollow. The forest recoiled, the creatures freezing mid-motion. The tree groaned, splitting down the middle, a blinding white light spilling from the crack. It consumed everything, pulling me into its brightness. For a moment I felt both weightless and crushed, terror and relief mingling as the forest screamed one final time. Then, silence and darkness. I woke on the roadside, my face pressed against cold gravel, the roar of passing cars faint in the distance. Body aching. There it was, my car, parked exactly where I'd left it. The road stretched endlessly. Ahead, the forest looming behind me, quiet and still, as if it had never moved. Was it over? I staggered to the car, fumbling with the door handle. Inside, everything looked normal. The air was stale but familiar, a safe cocoon compared to the oppressive terror of the forest. My hands trembled as I turned the key. The asphalt, carrying me far, far away. But as I drove, the radio flickered. Static gave way to faint, crackling whispers. My name, over and over. I turned the radio off, but the whispers didn't stop. They seeped into my mind, threading through my thoughts. In the rearview mirror, I didn't want to see if something was following me. Weeks passed, and I convinced myself it had all been a nightmare. It was sitting on my kitchen table, though I had left it behind in the forest. I opened it with shaking hands, and there it was, my handwriting, though I had never written these words. You can never really leave. I rushed to the window, and my blood ran cold. The forest was there, its dark canopy waiting just beyond my backyard. The dirt trail stretched out, inviting me back. The whispers started again, louder this time. And now, as you finish reading, I have to ask, are you sure the whispers aren't meant for you? I woke to the sound of my window sliding open, and saw a hand, pale and trembling, reaching through the gap. It wasn't human. The house was too quiet. Even with the faint hum of the heater, the silence pressed in like a living thing, wrapping around me as I stared at the blank page on my laptop. I'd been at my desk for hours, but my focus had frayed to nothing. My head throbbed, a deep rhythmic ache that felt like it was pulsing in time with my heartbeat. It started after I looked at the moon. Just a glance, barely a second, but I hadn't been able to shake the feeling that something had shifted. I rubbed my temples and blinked hard. That's when I saw it, a shadow, flickering at the edge of my vision. My eyes snapped to the corner of the room, but there was nothing there. Just the desk, the lamp, the faint glow of my screen. I laughed nervously under my breath and told myself to was just the strain of staring at the screen for too long. But then it happened again. A flicker. A ripple in the air. Almost imperceptible, but wrong enough to send a chill skittering down my spine. I turned back to my work, determined to ignore it. The moonlight poured through the window, spilling onto the floor in a pale, silvery pool. I froze. The light wasn't still. It was moving. Slow, deliberate shifts, like tendrils curling and uncurling, in search of something. My chest tightened. I forced myself to look away and move to another room, but the sensation followed me. Whispers started, a faint melodic hum just at the edge of hearing. No matter where I went, I felt it, watching, waiting. The whispers had grown louder, tugging at the edge of my sanity. They weren't words, not exactly, but they carried the weight of meaning, an insistence that I needed to understand. Something. The corner of the closet years ago. It smelled of dust and time. The lid, creaking as I pulled it free. Inside were the remnants of my grandmother's life, faded photographs, yellowed newspaper, clippings, and her journals, their covers cracked with age. I didn't know what I was looking for until I found it. A small, leather-bound notebook that sent a shiver through my fingertips. Her handwriting, sharp and spidery, filled every page. The first lines I read sent chills crawling up my spine. The moon is not what we think. It watches, it waits, and on certain nights it opens its door. I flipped through the pages, my pulse pounding louder with every word. She described people who vanished on full moons, leaving no trace but their whispers on the wind. She wrote about strange shadows cast by moonlight and the sense of being seen when no one was there. One passage stopped me cold. The moon marks those who stare. They become its own. It never lets them go. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. A memory bubbled up from my childhood. Her voice, firm and unwavering. Don't look at the moon. Not when it's full. Back then it was a silly rule, one I'd ignored. Now it felt like a lifeline I'd severed. The whispers grew louder, almost demanding, as if they were coming from the box itself. My hands trembled as I slammed it shut, but the sound followed me, rising. Something wanted me to keep reading. Something wanted me to understand. I woke suddenly, my heart racing, with no idea what had startled me awake. Suffused with an eerie silvery glow, far too bright for the middle of the night. My breath caught. As I realized the glow wasn't coming from my lamp or the streetlights outside. It was the moon. Its light poured through the window, unnaturally vivid, filling every corner of the room. I tried to turn away, to close my eyes, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. It felt as though invisible hands were holding me down, forcing me to stare. The moon seemed closer than it should be, so large that its surface dominated the sky. The craters were clearer than I'd ever seen, and they moved, subtly shifting as though something inside was alive. A faint pulse rippled through the light, rhythmic, like a heartbeat, and it filled my ears. My chest tightened as a shadow crossed the moon's surface, something long and skeletal moving behind its glowing facade. When the paralysis broke, I gasped and bolted upright, shivering as I tore my gaze away. I grabbed the nearest blanket and wrapped it around me, trembling. Books on my shelf, dozens of them, had been pulled down and lay scattered across the floor. Every single one was open, their pages turned to images of the moon or stories about the supernatural. My grandmother's photograph had fallen too, lying face down. When I picked it up, I froze. Her eyes weren't the same. They stared back at me, wide and sorrowful, as though she knew what I'd done. The whispers started again, louder now, rising from the corners of the room. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices, calling me to the window. The lights went out with a sharp, mechanical click. I froze, gripping the edges of the blanket, wrapped around me, outside. My phone was dead too. No signal, no light, just darkness, and the pale glow of the moon that seeped through the window like liquid. The whispers returned, louder this time, rising from every corner of the room. They weren't distant anymore. They were here, filling the space around me with an eerie, melodic hum that felt almost alive. My chest tightened, and I stumbled toward the door, desperate for air, for escape, for anything that wasn't this. The moment I stepped outside, I realized something was wrong. The air felt heavier, thicker, like I was wading through water. The trees that bordered my property looked different, twisted, their branches curling away from the light. They trembled, almost imperceptibly, as though they were afraid of the moonlight. I didn't know why I kept walking. Something was pulling me, an invisible thread that drew me toward the open field behind my house. Long shadows that writhed and flickered, even though nothing moved. That's when I saw them. Figures. Faint, tall, and thin. They stood in the moonlight like smoke, given form. Their edges shimmered, flickering in and out of focus. They didn't move, but I could. Feel their eyes, if they had eyes, fixed on me. My legs felt like they were sinking into the earth, each step harder than the last. The whispers grew sharper, almost urgent, and the figures began to shift, their forms rippling like waves in a frosty lake. A small blur appeared, like the flash of lightning over a sea of sleep, and the figures began a pool of light. I wanted to run, but the compulsion was stronger. I couldn't escape, not anymore. The burning started in my hand. At first, I thought it was just a scratch, a sting from brushing against something sharp, but when I held it up to the moonlight, I froze. There, on the skin of my palm, was a faint, crescent-shaped mark. It shimmered, faintly, as though etched with liquid silver and pulsed with an unnatural heat. I tried to rub it away, but the sensation only deepened. It wasn't a surface wound. It felt as though it had been carved into me, part of me. The whispers intensified, sharper and clearer now. I staggered backward, clutching my hand, but the world tilted beneath me. When I blinked, I wasn't standing in my backyard anymore. I was somewhere else. The ground beneath me wasn't earth but a silver surface, soft and endless like moonlight made. Solid. The sky was black, darker than anything I'd ever seen, speckled with faint stars that flickered like dying embers. Limbs were impossibly long, bending in ways that defied reason. They moved without sound, sliding closer, their forms rippling as though made of smoke. I wanted to scream, but the air felt thick in my lungs, suffocating. One of the figures leaned down, its face inches from mine. Its gaze wasn't malicious, but cold and infinite, as if it saw every piece of me, my fears, my regrets, my soul. Then the thought came, not in my voice, but with the weight of the whispers that had haunted me all night. You are ours now. You belong to the moon. The vision shattered, and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. My backyard had returned, but the crescent mark still burned, and I knew the figures were watching. They always would be. When I woke, the light was still there, pale and silver. It pooled around the edges of my bed like water, moving ever so slightly, as if alive. I sat up slowly, my body stiff and weak. The clock on the wall read 8 after 8. Once the clock was clear, I looked down at the hospital. My nightstand blinked 12 over and over. My phone was still dead. How long had it been? Hours? Days? I pulled back the blanket and froze. The mark on my palm had spread, curling in intricate lines, up my wrist and forearm. The patterns shimmered faintly, shifting in the dim light when I tried to focus on them. The whispers had quieted, but now I could hear something else. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, moving slowly through the hallway outside my room. Straining to listen, the steps stopped just outside my door. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and held it tightly. My fingers shook as I crept toward the door, every inch a battle against the suffocating dread pressing down on me. Flung it open, ready to swing. The hallway was empty, but the mirror at the end of it wasn't. I froze as I saw my reflection, or what should have been my reflection. It stood still, staring back at me, but its head tilted slightly to the side, its movements slower than mine. Its eyes, my eyes, were dark, hollow pits that seemed to pull the air from my lungs. The shadows around it stretched unnaturally, long and sharp, reaching toward me. I stumbled back into my room, slamming the door shut, but the light still seeped in, through the cracks, faint and silver, growing brighter as the whispers returned. There was no escaping it. The moon found me, even in the dark. The whispers stopped suddenly, plunging the house into a silence that felt heavier than any sound. My grandmother. Don't let it take you. There's still time. Her words seemed to come from everywhere at once, soft but insistent, carried on a cold wind that wasn't there a moment ago. And against the glass, the moon was enormous now, dominating the sky like a pale, lidless eye. Its surface rippled and shifted, revealing what looked like a vast black void, stretching endlessly into the cosmos. Light it cast was sharper than before, cutting through the shadows and illuminating the figure. Standing in the middle of the field, it looked human at first. Then it moved, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its joints folding and twisting as if its body were a marionette with broken strings. The figure raised a long, thin arm and pointed directly at me. I should have turned away, I should have run, but my feet carried me forward, out of the house, into the night. As I stepped into the field, the light around the figure thickened, blurring its edges. Its face was smooth and featureless, save for the hollow, unblinking eyes that bored into me. It gestured for Weeder to follow, but he sat down dumbly. Me to follow, its head tilting unnaturally to one side. Above us, the moon's surface began to split, a jagged crack spreading across its glowing expanse, like smoke streaming into the void above. I could feel the pull now. The ground beneath me trembled as the voice returned. Not my winter was grandmother's this time, but something darker, and I couldn't resist. The moment I stepped fully into the moonlight, the world shattered. My body wasn't my own anymore. My limbs felt weightless, unraveling thread by thread, as a force stronger than gravity pulled me upward. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The ground disappeared, replaced by a vast, endless void. The moon loomed closer, its jagged cracks spreading wider, consuming its surface. I was being drawn into the darkness, my entire body trembling as I felt myself passing through. Then, silence. I opened my eyes. Or maybe I didn't. Around me stretched a silver expanse, soft and gleaming, as though the moon's light had solidified into an endless landscape. The sky above was an infinite black, broken only by faint, flickering stars that seemed impossibly distant. They were there, the figures I'd seen before, the ones that had haunted my field, my house, my mind. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, surrounding me in a wide circle. Their hollow eyes shone faintly, their featureless faces turned toward me with an intensity I could feel, but not understand. One of them stepped forward, its limbs bending in ways that made my stomach lurch. It didn't speak, but its presence filled my head with unbearable clarity. The truth wasn't delivered in words, but in images, feelings, a flood of understanding that left no room for denial. The moon wasn't a celestial body. It wasn't a satellite. It was a doorway, an ancient, living entity that watched, lured, and consumed. Those who looked too long, who stepped too close, were claimed. They became part of this place, their forms twisted, their minds absorbed into its endless hunger. I tried to move, to escape, but the silver ground beneath me rippled, holding me in place. The figures stepped closer, their gazes unyielding. I realized then, I was becoming one of them. I couldn't fight it anymore. My body wasn't mine. It was unraveling, slipping into the silver expanse beneath me. She was swallowing me whole. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat, replaced by the whispers that had haunted me for so long. Only now, they weren't whispers. They were commands. The figures surrounded me, their forms towering and skeletal, their hollow eyes burning with something ancient and unyielding. One leaned closer, its face so near I could feel the cold radiating from it. It raised a long, spindly hand and placed it over my chest. Pain exploded inside me, a tearing, ripping sensation, as if my very essence was being pulled apart, that had claimed me. I saw flashes of others, countless others, who had stood where I stood. Now their bodies twisted into these creatures of shadow and light. And then I felt it, the moon's will, It was inside me, filling every empty space I had left. My body moved without command, my limbs jerking as they reshaped into something I couldn't recognize. My voice was gone, replaced by a low hum that matched the others, blending into the void. But somewhere, deep inside, a fragment of me remained, just enough to understand. The moon's light wasn't confined to me. It was growing, reaching. Its whispers had traveled through stories, warnings, even my grandmother's voice, and now they would travel through. As my hollow eyes turned toward Earth, I saw it for what it was, another place to watch, to wait. The moon had always been watching, and now, so was I. If you're reading this, the moon already sees you. The next time it's full, don't look, don't listen. But are you sure it hasn't already found you? Look around. Are you really alone? If you dare, share this story. Every retelling draws it closer.